Britain won the war, but lost the empire. That's the story they don't teach in school. When World War II ended in 1945, Britain was victorious. Hitler was dead. The Nazis defeated. The Union Jack still flew over a quarter of the Earth's landmass. But Britain was broke. Completely bankrupt. And the country that broke them was their closest ally, the United States of America. This is the story of how America used World War II to destroy the British Empire and become the world's sole superpower. Not with guns, with loans. Our story begins in 1939. Britain was still the world's dominant power. The British Empire controlled India, Australia, Canada, large parts of Africa, the Middle East, and strategic points across every ocean. The Royal Navy was the largest in the world. London was the financial capital. The British pound was the global reserve currency. Britain was rich, powerful, and arrogant. They assumed their empire would last forever. Then Germany invaded Poland, and everything changed. Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939. They expected a short war, a replay of World War I. Germany would be contained, peace would be negotiated. The empire would continue. But they were wrong. Germany steamrolled through Europe. France fell in 6 weeks. By June 1940, Britain stood alone. The entire continent was controlled by Hitler. The Soviet Union had a pact with Germany. America was neutral. Britain was isolated and desperate. Fighting a war is expensive. Unimaginably expensive. Britain needed weapons. Aircraft, ships, tanks, ammunition, food, fuel, everything. And they needed it immediately. British factories couldn't produce enough, fast enough, so they turned to the United States. America had the industrial capacity, the resources, the untouched infrastructure. But America wanted to be paid. In gold. In cash. In assets. Not promises. Not IOUs. Real payment. Britain started liquidating the empire. They sold American assets first. British companies owned factories and real estate across the United States. Courtaulds had textile mills. British investors owned railroads. All of it was sold, sometimes at fire sale prices. The money went to buying American weapons. When the American assets ran out, Britain shipped gold. Literal gold bars, from the Bank of England to the Federal Reserve. Britain sent over 700 tons of gold to America in 1940 and 1941. When the gold ran low, they shipped anything of value. British scientists sent over all their research, including the plans for radar and the early work on the atomic bomb. Technology that would make America a superpower, given away to buy bombers. By December 1940, Britain was running out of money. Churchill wrote to Roosevelt begging for help. "We can't pay anymore, but we'll lose without your weapons." Roosevelt faced a problem. The American public didn't want to join the war. Isolationism was strong. Mothers remembered World War I and didn't want their sons dying in Europe again. But Roosevelt wanted to help Britain. More importantly, he saw an opportunity. Britain was desperate. Desperate people accept bad deals. Roosevelt created Lend-Lease in March 1941. The program was sold to the American public as charity. "We're lending Britain weapons to fight Hitler. They'll return them after the war or pay us back someday." It sounded generous. The reality was different. Lend-Lease was the largest wealth transfer in history. Britain would receive weapons and supplies, but they'd owe the United States. The terms were intentionally vague. Payment deferred until after the war, when Britain was weak and America was strong. Perfect leverage. The numbers are staggering. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States gave Britain $31 billion worth of supplies under Lend-Lease. That's over $500 billion in today's money. Britain received aircraft, tanks, ships, trucks, jeeps, food, oil, raw materials, everything needed to fight. The Soviet Union got $11 billion. China got $1.6 billion. But Britain got the most, because Britain needed the most. And because America wanted Britain to owe the most. What people don't realize is Britain had to pay for Lend-Lease. It wasn't a gift. It was a loan with conditions. The conditions were buried in the details. The fine print that destroyed an empire. Article 7 of the Lend-Lease Agreement required Britain to dismantle its system of imperial preference after the war. Imperial preference was the economic structure of the British Empire. Colonies traded preferentially with Britain, lower tariffs, guaranteed markets, closed to outside competition. This made the empire profitable. It was how Britain extracted wealth from India and Africa and Australia. Article 7 required the system to be destroyed. Free trade, open markets, no preferences. In other words, Britain had to open its empire to American companies. Standard Oil, Ford, General Motors, they'd have access to British colonies on equal terms. The empire's economic foundation was dismantled by contract, signed when Britain had no choice. There were other conditions. Britain had to share military technology, radarn sonaron jet engines, code breaking, everything. Britain also had to give up naval bases. Bermuda, Newfoundland, the Caribbean, 99-year leases to America. Essentially permanent. The Royal Navy's dominance ended. The US Navy took over. Britain had to allow American auditors to inspect British finances, to verify they really were broke. Humiliating. A superpower reduced to opening its books to prove poverty. All of this was required to keep receiving weapons to fight Hitler. The war ended in 1945. Britain was victorious but destroyed. British cities were bombed. The economy was devastated. 1 million British soldiers and civilians were dead or wounded. But they won. Now came the bill. The United States demanded repayment for Lend-Lease. Britain owed billions. They had no money. British gold reserves were gone. Sold to America, British foreign investments were sold. Also to America. The empire was financially exhausted. So America offered a loan. The Anglo-American Loan Agreement of 1946. Britain borrowed $3.7 billion. That's about $50 billion today. The interest rate was 2%. Sounds generous. But the terms were brutal. Britain had to repay in dollars, not pounds. This meant Britain had to earn dollars through exports, competing with American companies who had untouched factories while Britain's were bombed. The loan also required Britain to make the pound convertible to dollars within 1 year. This was insane. British currency would be weak. Everyone would convert pounds to dollars, running out Britain's remaining reserves, which is exactly what happened. In 1947, Britain tried to make the pound convertible. Within weeks, Britain lost a quarter of its reserves. They had to stop convertibility and beg for more American loans. The final piece was the Marshall Plan. Starting in 1948, America gave billions to rebuild Europe. But there were strings. European countries receiving Marshall Plan money had to buy American goods, use American companies, adopt American standards. Britain received Marshall Plan aid, but less than Germany, less than France. America was rebuilding its former enemies more than its wartime ally. Why? Because Germany and France would become markets for American goods. Britain was a competitor, a declining one but still a competitor. Better to help your future customers than your rival. By 1950, Britain was a shadow of its former self. The empire was crumbling. India gained independence in 1947. Britain couldn't afford to hold it. Palestine was abandoned in 1948. The cost was too high. Over the next 2 decades, the entire empire would be liquidated. Not because of noble ideals about self-determination, because Britain was bankrupt and couldn't afford to maintain control. The Suez Crisis in 1956 made it obvious. Britain and France tried to retake the Suez Canal from Egypt. America said no, threatened to dump British pounds and crash the currency. Britain backed down, humiliated. The era of British global dominance was over. The American era had begun. Britain didn't yet finish repaying the World War II loans until 2006. 61 years after the war ended, the final payment was £50 million. By then, the money was meaningless, but the symbolism was clear. Britain spent 2 generations repaying the debt it incurred to survive World War II, and the country it owed was the United States, the ally that bankrupted an empire while saving it from Hitler. Here's what this story reveals. World War II wasn't just a military conflict. It was an economic war. America used Britain's desperation to dismantle the British Empire and install itself as the global hegemon. They did it legally, through loans and agreements and conditions. Britain had no choice. Sign or lose the war, so they seek and lost the peace. The British Empire died, not on the battlefield but in the accounting department. America didn't conquer Britain. It foreclosed on them. Roosevelt understood something Churchill didn't. You don't need to invade a country to control it. You just need them to owe you money. And when they can't pay you, take what you want. Military bases, naval dominance, access to markets, technology, everything. Britain gave it all away, not to Hitler, to America. Their ally, their savior, their creditor. This is how empires really die. Not with a bang, with a bill. Britain won the war, but America won the century. And they did it by making sure Britain paid for the privilege of surviving. If you made it this far, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think America exploited Britain, or was this just real? And subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for watching.